So Bushiroad just announced a new mechanic, energy generators, and also 50 cards in the main deck in standard now. Let's talk about that. Check out Dueling Guard's deck boxes, playmats, and binders. The great quality products that are anime based. They continually have more anime options becoming available. Use the affiliated link in the description for a 5% discount on your next purchase. Good mythical morning, everybody. And so we got some awesome news. And so right off the bat, we saw some of the new units coming out for the next set of support. And for me, I definitely am excited for Zorga and Welstra as well, since I play both decks. And I will be doing an updated deck profile for Welstra for set 13. I'm just waiting on the cards too, so stay tuned for that later this month. However, really the reason that you're here for is the new mechanic that they call Energy Generator. So essentially it has a counter from 0 to 10, and it's a ride deck crest. And so essentially once you ride, you can put this into your crest zone. And if you're going second, you energy charge 3. Furthermore, continuous, you can only have up to 10 energy. Auto, at the start of your ride phase, you energy charge 3. And then lastly, act. Once per turn, you can energy blast 7 and draw 1 card. So many questions about this already. So one way to look at this is that it's really an additional resource that we can use. So think about like Counterblast or Soul Blast. We're going to have cards that use this as cost. And so this is super useful in that round without adding too much complexity. And so an example of complexity is that I did a Wino Premium video earlier, and one of the reasons that people play Standard is that they have very busy lives. And so that's definitely understandable. So you just want to play the game, have fun. You didn't have to get caught up with too much of the intricacies of a deck or a metagame format to even just have fun or enjoy the game. And so a lot of people like the simplicity where it's not as dynamic as Premium or V Premium, where you potentially have like disruptive plays and different lines of play during your opponent's turn, like things of that nature. And I think this is a good middle ground where the other side of the spectrum, some people will like some more complexity in it. And this is really just an additional resource where we can just use more skills, which can also just help with deck building, but also like gameplay as well. So I think this is a really good middle ground. And I think Bushiroad really did a good spot on that, keeping standards simple as well. And I think they want to cater more to the casual audience, as a lot of people have said. And then also Bushiroad has said as well in streams too. And I think this is a really good middle ground. But more on this. What's interesting about this is that, every single turn, you're essentially going to get 3 energy. So you're able to map how much energy you have, whether you're going first or second. Going second obviously starts off with 3 as soon as you ride to grade 1. So you may have some advantage on using energy blast skills. Right off the back, you'll be able to draw 1 if you use 7 of them. But also, it seems that they're going to add additional cards that use that resource already. And so they're bringing the Cray Elementals back, and so we have Light Elemental, Popawa, and so Continuous Vanguard or Rigard, if you would ride from the ride deck, you can ride by paying Energy Blast 4 instead of choosing 1 card from your hand and discard it. So we've seen skills like this with other decks, like in Lyrical Monasterio, where instead of you're discarding to ride from the deck, this lets you essentially just keep those cards in hand. Some decks would rather keep the cards instead of discarding, because every piece is a combo piece, essentially. So this is a nice alternative. So if you want to include this in your ride deck as your grade 2 ride, some ride lines just don't have great ride line support. So for example, originally Magnolia, the grade 2 and the grade 1 honestly were swapped out for maybe the Roroa engine or even the Zorga engine. So that could be a deck, for example, that can take advantage of that as well, just having the additional effect of energy blasting now. Furthermore, the second skill is that when it's placed on Rigger Circle or the Guardian Circle, you can energy blast 2, and then this unit will get plus 5k attack and 5k plus shield until the end of the turn. So there's already skills that they're working on where units can have power or maybe shield value. This is kind of nice because, plus 5 shield to a grade 2 is 10k shield. Sometimes that magic number 10k that you need to guard with. So I think they're also including cards where you can just use the energy blast essentially to help compensate for the guard value as well. But I'm pretty sure they're going to have more skills that isn't just plus 5 or plus shield 5. They're going to have other skills that really would cater to each nation. And so I'm thinking something for Stoicheia or Brantgate, Lyrical, and so many other nations that will get their specific units, but using this resource as well. Which is also interesting. I know Lobos have made a point in my Discord server where some decks just struggle with advantage. And so maybe the deck is built where you really do rely on just drawing cards, and this is another way to help compensate that for the hand size too. So there is some wiggle room on the direction that you want your deck to go on how much it depends on this resource. Think about it as like your deck building where you have cards of using like Counterblast or Soul Blast, or maybe like discarding cards from hand. Like you have to think about those resources when you deck build, because you don't want to be in a situation where too many cards use the same resource and then you can't use them all in one turn, or you're just constantly struggling not having enough resource to use the full power of the cards that you put in your deck in the first place. It's also worth pointing out that I was looking for also like maybe like besides the pros, what are some of the cons with the energy generators? And at first I thought it was the last skill, but then they caught themselves making it an act where you know, essentially energy blast 7 to draw a card. I initially thought it was included in the right phase as well. And it's the most advantageous time where you would like to draw an additional card because it's really the beginning of your turn, but also it's an opportunity for you to get a copy of your Vanguard to Persona Ride. Or maybe if you play a Stride decks, that it can potentially help you actually pitch for the cost of Stride, whether it be 2 cards or maybe 1 card at that point. So it can be turn enabling for that player, especially if they just dealt with a very aggressive turn and they have no cards in hand too. It can get in a situation where it's kind of like OT, like the OT obviously is worse, but like whenever an OT is involved, it just shuts down usually a turn, right? Especially defensively, or if it's aggressively, it just makes it like a lot crazier to handle. But like this is not so bad. This is more like getting lucky from a draw, essentially, so that person can still like Persona Ride or maybe like Stride, but they made it in the act, so which is in the main phase essentially. So then that's a lot more reasonable, and it's a way also where it's more supplemental instead of like more game changing, if that makes sense. Certain decks will have more advantage of drawing into like the main phase as well, still. So for example, our Mascas decks, because if you don't have the Hydrogram or if you don't have the Mascas grade 3 yet, it's another way to potentially draw into them, which is the missing piece that you may need to do the skill. And those cards, you know, if your opponent's already at grade 3, you can activate Persona Ride, so that it can actually be big during the main phase, essentially. So sort of a con, not really, but you know, it is what it is, right? Nothing's ever perfect. The other thing too, there's speculation, I'm not sure if they mentioned in the stream, but essentially that there's that divine skill for each nation. They haven't announced it yet, and more than likely it's going to be on those units too, such as like Zorga and Welstra and so on. So we will see if the divine skill will use the energy generator at all whatsoever too. However, right before we got the announcement of the energy generators, they announced that the main deck for standard was going from 46 to 50 cards, and then you still have the 4 cards in the right deck as well, so a total of 54. And it was interesting because it was really unexpected, and this is before the energy generator announcement too. So like, why are you doing this? Like it seems really odd. That is pretty game changing in a way where like you have to approach deck building now a little bit differently. Not too different, because we already play 50 cards in the main deck for V and premium as well, so not a big deal there. But it got me thinking, like, what are they trying to do? And so what are the pros and cons as well? It's like the pros, you know, for decks, like for example, like if you play Welstra, you sometimes run into a deck out issue, and I'm sure other decks as well. And so having the additional 4 cards can help prevent that a little bit, or at least give you like an extra turn, essentially. And I know that Makina Blau had mentioned this in my Discord too, because we were both talking about that already for the new support. But another aspect too, when it comes to deck building, I was kind of like thinking like they could have, instead of adding 4 cards to fit more stuff in the deck, they could have just converted the perfect guards that are grade 1s into the triggers, just like they did with V. So essentially in V and Premium, we can use PG draws, essentially, or 30k Sentinels that are crits, essentially. So you can have triggers that are Sentinels, which leaves room in the grade 1s or other cards that you want, especially in Standard, because you don't have to worry about those ratios anymore, because you're guaranteed the right deck to right up anyway. So you can add more grade 2s, grade 3s, or grade 1s. It's really to your heart's content at that point. And then obviously some decks use grade 4s. But it got me thinking, like, why wouldn't they do that? Because if they essentially reduced or they restricted the Sentinels onto certain triggers, then it can influence the triggers that you play. I know when Overdress started, front triggers became widely available to all the clans and nations. Before, in V Series and Premium, it was just for the Excel clans, essentially. So they probably want to keep that in that respect, so they thought that why not just add more cards that are non-triggers, essentially, so you can have more room for more stuff, essentially. So I think that's why they went that direction. And at first I was like, why are you adding more space to begin with? And then with the energy generators, I'm assuming that we want to now play energy blasting or energy charging cards now, essentially, in what our decks are already capable of doing. I think that's a good thing to do because it opens more variety too. your deck can take advantage of the energy generator, or you have a deck that doesn't really care for it. In fact, you may play already existing cards that honestly you could fit in right now to make it a lot better. And so there's a bunch of decks that wishes they had more room for other cards. And then the energy generator can be just like Energy Blast 7, draw a card each turn when you have that. Essentially, keep it simple at that point. There are two cons that do kind of point out, or at least worth pointing out. And so the biggest thing is like consistency. For casual gameplay, we welcome it. You know, more cards, more to play with, more fun moments, that type of deal. I'm all for that. There is a competitive part of me though that knows that our decks are a little bit less consistent now. And it comes down to the probability, the math, you know, the nerd in me, essentially. And without getting too much into the specifics, essentially this number is what you care about, is the population size, which is your deck size. Again, we had 46 cards left in the main deck with the 4 cards outside of the right deck. And then the sample size is really your hand, your starting hand, essentially if you did a full mulligan, because you can return the 5 cards to the bottom of the deck and you're guaranteed 5 new cards. So you can count that as 10 cards essentially. And you just want to see at least 1 copy of the card you want. You can also include if you draw into 2 or 3 or 4 copies of the card, that's included. And so when we run this, it's about 63.9% essentially. So that means if I were to compare it in 10 games, at least 6 of the 10 games, I will see the card that I'm looking for. This is for any card that you play 4 copies, essentially. So we're at 63%. What happens when we change it to the 50 cards in the main deck now? Does it change significantly? And the answer is actually not really. It changes really small to 60.3%. So really it's a 2 to 3% difference that it's less consistent now. 3% is very small compared to, like, let's say 10%, because that 10% then will increment to essentially like a game out of 10 games, essentially. So you can view it that way. So I just wanted to point that out, that sure, it technically is a con in that respect, but it's pretty small at that point. Also, like, don't take the numbers too seriously, because there's other mathematical stuff that you can improve the probability, like drawing for turn, drive checks, draw triggers, etc. Other skills essentially to get the cards that you actually want by turn 1 or turn 2, turn 3. Obviously, you could do that, but I just wanted to show this simple calculation just to give you an indicator when you're deck building. The other thing worth pointing out is that we have more cards to put in the deck box now. So if you have a simple Ultra Pro deck box, if it's single sleeve, you can fit it in. This is my Zorgo one with like the right deck that's double sleeve. It also has like the plant tokens and the dragon tree markers, so it should be able to fit. However, double sleeve might be a different story. But I also have like Dueling Guards box, and as you can see, there's plenty of room, especially if you get the XL version. And if you want to double sleeve your cards as well, plenty of room. So it really depends on the deck boxes that you have and also the amount of sleeves. So it is a con because you basically need more sleeves and you need more room in your deck boxes. And sometimes it's just like another thing that we had to like invest into the game, right? So I understand that. But I at least want to like point that out as well. And the last tidbit is that they changed the winner of the die roll essentially gets to choose now. Instead of like higher roll goes first, essentially, now higher roll gets to choose if they go first or second. So I'm excited for this because this was like basically like Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the metagame competitively that I played like years ago before I really started getting more serious into Vanguard. And the winner would always choose going first or second. And that is strategic. That is like competitive play, especially in a big regional. So that's big. And so I'm curious how the new cards coming out will really cater to whether you're going first or second. The only difference that I see right now, it's like your starter drawing if you went second, or starting off with a higher energy blast count if you went second, because you start off with 3 compared to the person that's going first. So my overall consensus is really that I think this does more good than it does bad, essentially. It's an additional resource to play with. If you are a player that plays premium and you also play standard, you realize that there's only so much you can do in standard before you kind of get bored. Can fall back to premium. In premium, there's so much to account for. There's so much play testing. There's so many like lines of play. So sometimes when you're a veteran, it can be a little frustrating sometimes. And it's nice that they're doing the deck sets like Chernui and Luard for those veteran players. So I think this is really a compromise. They're slowly helping standard without power creeping to something that's crazy. If you think about it, like we already have grade 3s and skills like Damascus skills they trigger persona right as soon as they write to grade 3, assuming that, you know, the opponent's at grade 3 too. So like they've done a good job speeding that process up to turn 3. And if they try to speed it up anything early, then it just becomes probably unhealthy. Also, like Vanguard, when it first started, it was overcosted or like power crept as hell. So example, you had units that were on hit, and then if you were successful, then you can counterblast 1 or 2, and then the effect was to draw 1 card. So that's like overcosted or power crept in that sense. So they can't just make skills even better, because overdress has done a really good job on starting skills at a solid place that still makes it fun, essentially, for everybody. So I think this is good that they're adding another additional resource where now you can just expand horizontally, rather than like kind of like, I guess, vertically, in the sense of like the deftness in the game. It's more like the wideness of it, to the tools that you have when you play a game. And the cons are kind of small. Again, you need more sleeves. You may need a bigger deck box. Now you have to like deck build every deck that you have in standard at that point too. I mean, that could be fun, right? Some people enjoy that stuff, like reinventing the wheel, or not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but also like just like, hey, I get to deck build something a little bit newer that's fresh, because ultimately we kind of get bored of playing the same thing after a certain amount of time as well. So we just like new stuff, and we like to adapt and play the game. And let me know your thoughts too. I'm pretty sure I missed some points. I actually avoided watching any other YouTubers do news like this, so then I could just have my fresh perspective. These are literally my initial thoughts on it. I'm sure as I learn more about it from different perspectives, I'm going to learn more things. And also as they flesh out the divine skills later on, now we're going to see the big picture once it comes full circle, essentially. So again, let me know in the comments below, see what you're thinking or speculating too. I'd love to have a conversation. And until the next one, amigos.